She ran from her own wedding, but the millionaire locked the door and whispered, "Tonight, you become mine. Let's begin. But first, a special request. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. And tell me, how did you find me? It's always a joy to know who's on the other side. I didn't hear the music. I didn't hear the guest screaming my name. I only heard my heartbeat, ragged, frantic, slamming against my ribs like it was trying to escape too. My heels sank into the gravel behind the chapel. My dress torn at the hem, lace strangling my ribs. The veil was ripped off hours ago. Or maybe minutes. I don't remember. I just remember the air finally hitting my lungs like something I hadn't tasted in years. Freedom. Or maybe fear. I ran. Not toward anyone. Just away. Away from a man I didn't love. From a family who smiled through clenched teeth. From a life that felt perfectly stitched around someone else's body. The alley beside the old chapel in Savannah was narrow, shadowed by Spanish moss and fading roses crushed beneath my steps. The sun was high, but I was ice. My fingers trembled as I pulled the bodice of the dress away from my skin, trying to breathe. And then, a car door opened. I froze. It was a black Range Rover, engine still purring, parked half out of the shadows. The passenger door was wide open, and in the driver's seat, Victor Hale. No, it couldn't be him, but it was. His hand rested on the steering wheel like he hadn't just found a bride running barefoot through back alleys. His jaw was locked, his tie undone, and his eyes were fire. "Get in," he said. That was all. No questions, no judgment, just a door open, and a voice I hadn't heard in years, low and quiet, wrapped in something I didn't know how to name yet. I stood there, chest heaving, heart rioting. "Victor," I whispered. He looked straight ahead. "Last chance, Elena." My legs moved before my mind could catch up. I slipped into the seat. The door closed with a soft, final click, and the city disappeared behind tinted windows and burning silence. He didn't speak. Neither did I. I could barely breathe through the weight of his scent, cedarwood, leather, storm. His presence filled the car like smoke. Thick, dangerous, beautiful. I stared at my lap. My hands were still clutching the torn dress. My thighs trembled. My body wanted to collapse. I didn't know where else to go, I whispered. He finally turned his head. One slow, scorching glance. I did. His hand shifted the gear into drive. And with that, the world I had been born into, the life carefully arranged around appearances and alliances, dissolved behind us. In front of me was only him, and the quiet promise of something I had never been given, a choice, a man who didn't ask, a door that had waited, wide open, for years, and a voice that would soon whisper in the dark, "Tonight, you become mine." The gravel crunched beneath the tires as he turned off the road and into something that looked like it didn't belong on any map. Trees arched overhead, thick with silence, swallowing the last trace of the city we'd left behind. The kind of silence that presses against your skin like velvet soaked in tension. I didn't ask where we were going. I didn't need to. It wasn't the kind of silence that demanded questions. It was the kind that whispered you were exactly where you shouldn't be, and exactly where you'd always wanted to be. His hand stayed on the wheel, fingers relaxed, but every line in his jaw was drawn tight, a sculpture of restraint. The sun filtered through the canopy above us in fractured patterns, gold cutting through green, like light through stained glass. My hands rested in my lap, fingers locked, dress crumpled, breath shallow. I could feel my pulse in my throat, in my fingertips, in the place just below my ribs, where everything inside me had started to unravel. He didn't look at me, not once, and yet I felt him everywhere, in the way his cologne filled the car like memory, in the way my skin sparked even though he hadn't touched me, in the space between his breaths and mine, like we were already sharing something far too intimate for words. When we reached the house, I knew without being told that it was his. Of course it was his. Dark wood, sprawling, hidden behind iron gates that opened with a sound too soft for steel. The kind of home that holds secrets. The kind that watches you even when it sleeps. He stopped the car and got out. Didn't say a word. Just walked around and opened my door like I hadn't just fled from an entire life. Like I was someone precious. Not broken. Not stolen. Just here. I stepped out, and the world tilted. Maybe from the heels I'd forgotten I was still wearing. Maybe from the way he looked at me, just for a second now, as if he knew I wasn't ready to be touched. But he was already touching everything I was trying to hide. The wind caught the skirt of my dress. It fluttered like something trying to escape. He reached past me and closed the car door, then turned and walked to the front steps. Didn't look back, just waited. The threshold stood wide open, and beyond it, Warmth spilled from soft lights, and something I couldn't name. Maybe cedar, maybe whiskey, maybe him. I followed. Not because I was told, because I was ready to be quiet inside for the first time in years. The door closed behind me with a hush. He slid the bolt home, and the sound echoed like the softest lock in the world. He didn't move. He just stood there, between me and the door, eyes resting on mine, body still. "Tonight," he said, his voice low, carved from shadow and smoke, "you become mine." My breath caught, not from fear, from recognition. It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a promise. It was the quietest truth I'd ever heard. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He turned, walked deeper into the house. I followed slowly, the hem of my dress brushing polished wood. The hall was long, the air scented with something masculine and elemental. This house knew how to hold warmth, how to hold stillness, how to hush even the wildest things into listening. We didn't speak. Not while he led me past the living room where a fire hummed softly in the hearth. Not while he motioned up the staircase with just a nod. Not even when he opened the door to a room washed in moonlight, the bed made, the windows open, the world so far behind us I could barely remember what had ever felt real before this. There was a white shirt folded on the armchair. One of his. Clean. Soft. I didn't ask if it was for me. I knew. He stood at the doorway for one long breath, then turned away and left. No instructions, no expectations, just distance, laced with the kind of desire that waits until it's chosen. The door stayed open behind him. I stood in the center of the room and listened, to the wind brushing the trees outside, to the silence inside me that wasn't fear anymore, to the truth that if I wanted to run again, I could. Nothing was stopping me. Not him, not this house. But I didn't want to. I reached behind me and unzipped the dress, let it fall. Not with shame, not with hurry, just with gravity and relief. The corset loosened, the sleeves slipped down, and then I stepped out of everything I had been. My skin prickled in the air, bare and raw, like something born. I pulled the shirt over my body. It smelled like him. It wrapped around me like breath. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart still trembling. I didn't know what would happen next. I only knew I wasn't cold anymore, that something inside me had unclenched, that I had never in my life felt so quietly claimed by something I hadn't yet touched. And in the hallway the floor creaked once, just once, like the house was breathing too. I woke before the sun, before my body had even fully remembered where it was, or what it had done. The cotton of his shirt clung to my skin like a second breath, like I'd slept inside a memory instead of a bed. The sheet still held the imprint of my weight, the ghost of my shape curled into something smaller than I'd like to admit. I hadn't cried, not once, but my ribs felt hollow, as if I'd exhaled too much and left part of myself behind somewhere on the chapel steps. The room was quiet in that sacred, almost unbearable way morning sometimes is, the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. I pulled the shirt tighter around me and crossed to the window. The glass was cool against my fingers. Outside, the sky was bruised with that early lavender light, the kind that doesn't rush to become anything. Mist clung to the trees. The world looked half-formed, and somehow, I matched it. I didn't know how long I stood there before I heard footsteps, slow, measured, and entirely unhurried. My heart didn't leap. It ached, like it had been waiting for the sound. The knock was soft, a hesitation, not a demand. I turned before I answered, and when I opened the door, he didn't say a word. He just looked at me, not at my legs, or the line of the shirt against my skin, or the mess of my hair, just at my eyes, and something in him softened, almost imperceptibly, like a thaw beginning under the surface. "You hungry?" he asked, voice still thick from sleep, edges dusted with gravel. I nodded. My throat wouldn't make sound yet. He stepped back to let me pass, but didn't touch me. Not even a brush of fingertips, just gave me space, like he knew the exact measure of how much I needed. The hallway was warm. The house smelled of coffee and cinnamon, of something almost domestic, almost impossible. I followed him down the stairs, bare feet silent on wood, the hem of the shirt brushing my thighs. He moved through his home like it wasn't his, like he didn't need to prove anything about it, or about himself. That was what startled me most. He had nothing to prove, and I had nowhere to hide. The kitchen was bright with early light. There was already a mug waiting for me, steam rising in soft curls. He handed it over without ceremony, without pretense, and I took it with both hands. The first sip burned my lips, and I welcomed it. I wanted to feel something real. We stood there for a while, him leaning back against the counter, me near the window, neither of us pretending we knew what this was yet. "Do you take sugar?" he asked finally. I shook my head. "Not anymore." He smiled then, A small, crooked thing that didn't reach all the way to his eyes, but still made something flutter low in my stomach. "You used to," he said. And there it was, the past, floating just under the surface like driftwood in a deep river. I looked up. "You remembered." "I remember everything," he said. It wasn't a boast. It was a confession. I set the mug down slowly, palms still warm, and leaned against the frame of the window. The trees outside shifted gently in the breeze, as if the world was listening too. "Why did you come for me?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. I didn't. Not exactly. I just hoped. That word lodged somewhere inside me, behind my ribs. Hoped. It felt too gentle for a man like him. Too bare. I turned to face him, crossing my arms without meaning to. A shield I didn't know I was raising. "I didn't think you'd still be here. After all these years." He pushed off the counter and walked toward me, slow and deliberate, stopping just a breath away. He didn't touch me, but I felt him like pressure, like heat. "I never left, Elena." His voice dropped into something quiet and irrevocable. "Not really." My chest tightened. I didn't want to believe him. I wanted to. Both were true. My fingers gripped the sides of the shirt and I tilted my chin up. "You were my brother's friend. And you were 17. And now?" I whispered. His hand lifted but didn't reach me. He held it there, hovering near my cheek like he was asking permission without words. "Now," he said. "You're here, in my house, in my shirt, and I'm trying very hard not to scare you away." I closed my eyes, just for a second, just to breathe him in. When I opened them, he was still watching me. Still that quiet storm wrapped in control. Still the man who had once sat on my parents' porch and refused to look too long at me in my sundress, even when he thought no one noticed. "I'm not scared," I said. And it was true. I was something else entirely. "Good." His voice warmed, roughened. "Because I don't plan on letting you run again." The heat between us flared, quiet but alive. He stepped closer, this time enough that I could feel the brush of his breath on my temple, the invisible thread of his intention wrapping around my spine. I should have pulled back. I didn't. My body swayed toward him without asking for permission, and when his hand finally touched my face, just his knuckles against my cheek, I let myself lean into it. His thumb traced the line of my jaw. "Reverent, you're not what I expected," I murmured. "You never were," he replied. The air thickened. My pulse tripped over itself, and when he pulled away, slowly, carefully, like he was returning something sacred to its place, I missed him before he was gone. He turned, walked back toward the counter, picked up his own mug and sipped. "There's food if you want it, or I can drive you somewhere, if you need to." He trailed off, and for the first time I heard it. The fear. The fragility behind all that silence. "I don't need to go anywhere," I said. And then softer, as if I was hearing it for the first time too. "I want to stay." He didn't smile, but he breathed, and the sound of that exhale, deep and quiet, was more intimate than any kiss. It wrapped around me like the promise he hadn't yet said out loud, one I already knew by heart. The second morning didn't feel like the first. The first had been breathless, laced with panic, still echoing with the sound of a door slamming shut behind a life I'd abandoned. But this was slower, heavier, like I'd begun to settle into the gravity of a place I didn't know I needed. The sun had already climbed above the trees when I came down the stairs, barefoot, still wearing the same white shirt that felt less like fabric and more like a tether to something I hadn't dared to name. He was already in the kitchen. He didn't turn when he heard me, just reached for another mug and poured. It wasn't a gesture of control. It was care, unspoken and warm, a small declaration in ceramic and steam. I took the cup from his hand, our fingers brushing for just a second too long. It was enough to make the skin along my spine tighten, my chest thrum with an awareness that had nothing to do with caffeine. He wore a gray sweater, sleeves pushed up, wrists exposed. His forearms looked like they remembered work, real work, not just numbers and pressure and boardrooms, but weight, earth, wood, strength. He nodded toward the table. I sat, tucked my legs beneath me like a girl who wasn't used to being watched this way. "You sleep?" he asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure it had been sleep exactly. "You?" "Some." His voice was different in the daylight, still low, but not as distant. It had texture now, intimacy. I watched him move through the kitchen like he belonged to the house, or maybe the house belonged to him. Everything about him seemed intentionally quiet, but not out of indifference. It was precision, a kind of stillness that wasn't empty but full of the things he didn't say. He placed a plate of toast and fruit between us, simple, unassuming. I took a bite, not because I was hungry, but because the act of eating beside him felt strangely sacred. I studied his hands as he poured more coffee, the way his fingers curled around the handle, the way his thumb rubbed a slow circle against the rim of his cup like he was grounding himself. "You always live like this?" I asked softly. He glanced up, eyes meeting mine like a held note in a song. "Like what?" "Quiet, remote, alone." He shrugged, but it wasn't careless. It was honest. "It's easier to hear yourself think out here." "And is that what you do? Sometimes? And the rest of the time?" He looked at me for a long moment, not past me, not through me, just into. "I try not to think about you." The words fell between us like stones in still water. I looked down at my hands, suddenly unsure of them, unsure of everything except the heat rising up my neck and the way my pulse betrayed me. "How long?" I asked, the question barely more than breath. "Since the summer you stole my lighter and denied it with the most innocent eyes I've ever seen." I laughed then, low and startled. "I forgot about that." "I never did." He smiled, really smiled, and the room shifted. Not the walls, not the floor, just the air. It thickened with the memory of things never said, of looks never held too long. I pushed the plate away gently and stood, wrapping my fingers around the warm ceramic of my mug. I walked to the window. The garden outside was blooming with early spring, wild and unmanicured, honest. "I used to wonder," I said quietly, "if you ever looked at me the way I looked at you." "I didn't," he said, and I flinched. But then, I tried not to. My breath caught. He stood behind me now, not touching, but close enough that I felt the heat of his body seep into mine. "You were too young. I was too afraid of what it meant." I turned to face him, slowly, my mug still held like a shield between us. "And now?" "Now," he said, voice rougher than before, "you're standing in my house wearing my shirt, and I can't stop thinking about how your lips tasted when you smiled." I didn't smile then. I couldn't. My whole body had gone still, like something inside me was standing at the edge of a cliff, toes over the line, wind at my back. I set the mug down carefully. "Say it again," I whispered. He stepped forward. 1 inch, 2. His hands didn't move. His breath did. "I think about you. Every day. Every fucking day, Elena." His eyes burned into mine. "Even when I try not to. Even when I tell myself I shouldn't." My mouth opened. No sound came. He leaned in, just slightly, enough for his voice to fall between my lips. "I think about the way you looked that last summer, about the way you said my name like it was a secret, about how I couldn't touch you because it would have ruined everything. And now you're here, and I don't know if I'm allowed to want you, but I do." I reached for him before I could stop myself. My fingers touched his chest first, solid, warm, steady, and then slid up to his neck, just under his jaw, where his skin was softer. He closed his eyes. His hands didn't move. I tilted my face up to his, close enough to feel the shape of his breath, but I didn't kiss him. I needed him to see me, not as the girl who ran from a wedding, not as the sister of his best friend, but as the woman who had always known that this was where the story was meant to begin. "Then want me," I said, "but don't ask for permission." He opened his eyes, and in them I saw it all. The man who had waited, the man who had burned, the man who would rather die than take what wasn't freely given. And then he moved, slow, deliberate. His hands came up and cupped my face like it might shatter if he wasn't careful. His mouth brushed mine, not a kiss, a question. And when I answered, when I pressed into him, when I let my fingers dig into the back of his neck and pulled him down to me, he groaned, soft, deep, like release, and I knew. This wasn't the end of the running. It was the moment I stopped pretending I'd ever truly wanted to escape him. The mirror didn't lie, but it didn't tell the whole truth either. The woman in its reflection wore his shirt like a question she hadn't learned how to ask. Her hair was loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders, eyes still clouded with something that wasn't sleep. Her mouth looked swollen, not from words, but from the way he had kissed her and then stopped, as if he needed to remember how to breathe without her lips. I stared at myself like a stranger might, like someone just passing through, catching a glimpse of a life she didn't expect to inhabit. The woman in the glass was both softer and more defiant than the girl who had stood at the altar 2 days ago. That girl had been hollowed out, a vessel for everyone else's dreams. This one, this version, looked undone in a way that felt holy. I didn't touch the mirror. I didn't need to. It was enough just to see. Enough to know that something irreversible had begun. Downstairs, I heard the low hum of his voice, faint through the walls. He was on the phone, probably handling something important in a way that required very little effort. Everything he did seemed to move at a different rhythm, as though time slowed down to watch him work. I didn't go to him right away. I needed a moment, a breath inside my own skin, a minute to collect the pieces that had shifted when he whispered against my mouth, when he looked at me like he'd known my body long before he ever touched it. I walked barefoot down the hall, trailing my fingertips along the banister, and made my way to the room he said I could use. It was filled with books, some stacked in uneven piles, others lining dark wooden shelves that reached the ceiling. The light from the window landed on an old armchair, worn leather and perfect, like it had been waiting for someone to fall apart in it. I sat, pulled my knees to my chest, let my eyes drift along the spines of stories someone had once needed to keep close. I wondered if he had read them all, if he'd sat in this very chair after long days, pressing his fingers to his temple, searching for something in fiction that he couldn't find in the world around him. There was a small photograph on the nearby table, black and white. A girl, no, a teenager, smiling too hard, wearing a swimsuit and a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind her, in the blurred background, a man in sunglasses, standing near a pool, turned just slightly toward her. I knew the picture. I remembered the day. I was the girl. And even though he hadn't looked at me directly, even though his eyes were hidden by glass and the weight of years between us, I remembered the way his body had gone still when he heard me laugh. I traced the frame with one finger, slow, reverent. That was the first time I understood what it meant to be seen by someone who didn't have the right to look. He hadn't touched me then, had barely spoken, but the air between us had changed, like something had begun to burn, quietly, where no one could see it. And now that fire lived inside my bones. The floor creaked behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. His presence folded around the room like a second atmosphere, heavier than air, more honest than silence. You kept it, I said. I did. His voice was softer here, not because he didn't mean what he said, but because the truth didn't need volume. Why? I asked, still staring at the girl I used to be. He walked closer, footsteps careful, measured, because I knew one day I'd need to remind myself I wasn't imagining it. Imagining what? I turned to him now, finally, my eyes catching his. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. The way you looked at me like you already knew. I stood then, slowly, letting the weight of everything I hadn't said rise between us. I didn't understand it then. I did. He stepped closer. That's why I left. You didn't leave, I whispered. You disappeared. Because it was the only way to not cross a line I'd never forgive myself for. I wanted to argue, to blame, to tell him how many nights I'd stared at my ceiling wondering why he vanished after that summer. But I didn't, because part of me had always known. And because the man standing in front of me now wasn't the same man who had walked away. He was quieter, stronger, and yet just as breakable. I was a girl, I said, barely audible. And now you're not. His breath caught as he said it, as if the words tasted like something forbidden and beautiful. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear with a touch that felt more like apology than desire. I thought about you, for years, even when I didn't want to, especially then. I leaned into his palm without thinking, my eyes closed, my breath hitched. He was everything I shouldn't have needed, everything I had tried to forget, everything I'd run to when I couldn't pretend anymore. What happens now? I asked. He stepped in, not too close, just enough for me to feel the question bloom between us. Now, he said, we stop lying. To ourselves, to each other. I opened my eyes. That sounds dangerous. It is. His smile was slow, reverent. But I've lived too long with the regret of silence. I'd rather burn in the truth of you than freeze in the safety of pretending. I pressed a hand to his chest, just over his heart, and felt it beating, strong, steady, painfully human. Then let's stop pretending, I said. Let's begin there. He nodded once, and then he kissed me, not with urgency, but with purpose, with memory, with the kind of hunger that doesn't beg, but claims, the kind that says, I've waited, I've wanted, and now I will learn you from the inside out, slowly, until there's nothing left we haven't touched. The day stretched slow, like honey slipping from the edge of a spoon, thick with tension and something warmer than dread, but sharper than comfort. We moved around each other like the space between us was sacred, like touching too soon might shatter whatever fragile thing was blooming under the weight of all our unsaid history. I found myself in the kitchen again, tracing the rim of a coffee mug I didn't need, the same one he had handed me that first morning, now cool and empty but heavy in my hand. The house around me was still, a silence that didn't feel lonely, but expectant, like it knew we were circling something we couldn't yet name. He was in the doorway, leaning his shoulder against the frame, arms crossed, gaze quiet, not invasive, not passive, just there, watching me the way he always did, like I was some delicate storm he'd waited years to stand beneath. "You okay?" he asked, voice low, textured. I nodded, then shook my head. "I don't know. Everything's loud inside." He stepped in slowly, each movement careful, not calculated, just deeply aware. "Then come outside," he said. "Let it be quiet for a while." I followed without speaking, my feet bare on cool stone, the screen door clicking softly behind us as we stepped into the open air. The sun was low, gold and forgiving, brushing the tops of the trees with a light that felt more like touch than illumination. We walked into the clearing behind the house where the trees opened just wide enough for sky to bleed through. He stopped, turned to me, and offered his hand. Not to take, to offer. And I slipped my fingers into his like they belonged there, like they had always known the shape of his palm. We stood like that, still, facing each other as the wind played with the hem of my dress, one of his old t-shirts I'd found folded in the guest room, soft and oversized and scented faintly of cedar and skin. "What do you want, Elena?" he asked, the question so quiet it barely touched the air between us. "Right now," I said, breath catching. "I just want to feel something that isn't confusion." His thumb grazed mine, a small ache of contact that unraveled something I didn't know I'd tied up so tight. "Then let me touch you," he whispered. "Only how you want. Only if it feels like breath and not burden." I nodded, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. He stepped closer, slowly, giving me every inch of space to stop him. I didn't. His fingers traced the edge of my wrist first, then slid up the inside of my arm, featherlight and reverent. My body leaned before I knew it was moving, drawn by a gravity that had nothing to do with mass and everything to do with memory. When his hand cupped my jaw, I closed my eyes, and when he kissed me, it was nothing like before. It was deeper, slower, an unraveling of years packed into a single breath. His other hand settled at the small of my back, pulling me into him, not roughly, not desperately, but like he was finally exhaling the ache he'd carried since the first time he saw me barefoot by that summer lake. I melted, fully. My hands found his chest, his shoulders, his neck, mapping skin that felt both foreign and deeply remembered. He kissed like he listened, closely, with his whole body. When he pulled back, his breath was shaky. "Tell me to stop if it's too much," he said. "I won't," I whispered. "But I need you to go slow. There's no other way I want you." He kissed me again, gentler this time, lips brushing mine in soft pulses, as if syncing our heartbeats through contact. Then he led me back to the house, his hand never leaving mine, not pulling, not guiding, just staying. We didn't speak as we walked upstairs. Words would have ruined it. He opened the door to the room I'd claimed, watched me step in, then paused at the threshold. "You want me here?" he asked. I turned, reached for him. "Only if you're staying." He entered, closed the door softly behind him. The light from the window washed the bed in a soft gray glow, the kind of light that made skin glow and shadows melt. He came to me slowly, hands careful, expression unreadable except for the intensity in his eyes. He didn't touch my clothes. He touched my face, my neck, my shoulders. Every movement a request, not a demand. I let him. I wanted him. I needed to know what it felt like to be undressed without being undone, to be looked at like a beginning and not a decision someone else made. He kissed the inside of my wrist, my collarbone, the curve just beneath my ear, and then finally the corner of my mouth again, as if to remind me that this softness was what he'd waited for. I reached for the hem of my shirt, pulled it over my head slowly. His eyes never left mine, not once. He didn't devour, he worshipped. His hands followed the trail of moonlight down my ribs, over my hips, anchoring me to the moment like he was etching the shape of me into memory. When I touched him, he stilled, breath faltering, eyes darkening with something that made my stomach tighten. We moved together like we'd been doing this for years in dreams neither of us admitted we had. Skin to skin, breath to breath, no sharp edges, only this soft ache of belonging. His mouth found mine again and again, not for hunger, but for tethering. Every kiss said stay, every touch said I see you, every movement asked are you still here, and every answer I gave was yes, yes, yes. When he finally sank into me, slow and deep, his forehead pressed to mine, I didn't cry, but something inside me broke open, gently, like a lock I didn't know had rusted shut. We moved in rhythm with the quietest kind of knowing, like our bodies had waited their whole lives to remember how to speak this language. And when I came undone beneath him, it wasn't loud, it wasn't frantic, it was sacred. He followed soon after, with a shudder, a whispered name, a kiss to the hollow of my throat like a vow. And then, silence. The kind that comes not from emptiness, but from completion. He stayed inside me for a long moment, forehead to my temple, breath tangled in mine, and I knew I wasn't lost anymore. I was found, in the arms of the only man who had never needed to chase me. Just wait, and open the door when I finally ran home. The road curved like a whisper through the forest, winding us farther from everything familiar, the trees growing taller, thicker, more silent the deeper we went. The windows were down just enough for the wind to slip in and thread itself through my hair, carrying with it the scent of pine, damp earth, and the coming of something neither of us had named yet. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift, knuckles relaxed but ready. The sunlight flickered through the leaves in rhythmic flashes, casting him in pieces of shadow and gold. I watched him in profile, the angle of his jaw, the concentration behind his quiet. He hadn't said where we were going. I hadn't asked. There was a trust now, unspoken, that whatever came next would be ours. Not borrowed, not imposed, not stolen, just chosen. The road narrowed into gravel, then dirt, then something almost too soft to be called a road at all, and then the cabin appeared, like it had grown out of the land itself. Dark wood, sloped roof, windows wide and waiting. The clearing around it hummed with stillness, as if the place itself knew we needed to arrive inside a moment too fragile for noise. He parked, killed the engine, and turned to me with something unreadable in his expression. Not hesitation, not doubt, just the quiet gravity of a man who was about to hand over something that mattered. I opened the door, stepped out slowly, felt the earth beneath my feet, cool, solid, real. The air smelled richer here, like memory and moss and maybe even healing. He unlocked the door and stepped aside to let me enter first. I crossed the threshold and immediately felt my lungs pulled deeper, like the air inside knew how to hold me better than the one I'd left behind. The cabin was simple, beautiful in its restraint. A wide stone fireplace, bookshelves built into the walls, a kitchen with worn copper pans and clean light spilling across the counters, a single bedroom visible through an open arch, the bed made with thick linens, the windows framing trees so close it felt like they were breathing with us. I turned slowly, taking it in, letting the silence fill me. He stood by the doorway, eyes never leaving me. "It's not much," he said, "but it's mine." I shook my head. "It's perfect." He walked toward me then, slow and steady, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. He stopped just close enough to feel. "I built it," he said, his voice low, a little rough. "After that summer, when I needed somewhere to remember and forget at the same time." I looked up at him, heart heavy with the ache of all we hadn't had, all we'd lost to the space between timing and fear. "You built this," I whispered, "and I married someone else." His jaw flexed, but he didn't look away. "You didn't choose wrong," he said quietly. "You just didn't get to choose for you." That undid me, that sentence, that mercy. I felt it land somewhere deep, somewhere still raw. He reached out, touched my face with the back of his hand. "I brought you here because no one knows this place. No one comes here. Not unless I bring them. And I've never brought anyone." I covered his hand with mine, pressed it to my cheek. "Then let's be quiet here, for a while." He nodded. "As long as you want." We didn't unpack. We didn't speak much. We moved through the cabin like it was already familiar. I found a blanket, wrapped it around my shoulders, curled into a corner of the sofa while he built a fire, the kind that started slow and grew like a breath inhaled deeply after too many shallow ones. He handed me a mug, tea this time, warm, fragrant, and sat beside me, not too close, just near enough that our knees touched. The fire crackled, the wind brushed the windows, and time folded in on itself. I rested my head against his shoulder. He didn't move, just let me lean. His hand found mine again, fingers sliding between mine with the kind of ease that only happens when something broken finally fits back into place. "This feels like a dream," I said. "It's not," he answered. "It's just real enough to be terrifying." I laughed then, soft, and he smiled into my hair. "But you're not scared," I whispered. "I am," he said, and kissed my temple. "But I'd rather be afraid with you than safe without you." We stayed like that until the fire died down and the shadows grew long, until the cabin glowed with only the light of what we'd built with our hands and breath. I stood first, pulled him with me, led him to the bedroom without asking, without ceremony. He followed like he had always known I would ask for this moment with my body before I found the words. We didn't rush. We undressed each other like it was a ritual, not for seduction, but for remembering, for reclaiming skin that had never known worship until now. He kissed my shoulder, my spine, the space just above my heart. And when he sank into me, slow and deep, it wasn't hunger. It was homecoming. Every movement said, I know you. Every sound said, I'm still here. Every breath said, I never left. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. The room was full of the kind of silence that sings. And when I fell asleep in his arms, the trees outside still swaying, the night curling around us like a vow, I knew this was the first place I had ever truly belonged. Not because he held me, but because I had finally stopped running. And he hadn't moved. Not once. The morning came like a hush, soft and golden, slipping through the tall windows and landing in warm puddles across the hardwood floor. I woke slowly, not from noise or light, but from the feel of his breath on my shoulder, steady, warm, threading through the fabric of sleep like a lullaby played in reverse. I didn't move. I didn't need to. His body was curled behind mine, one arm draped low around my waist, the other tucked beneath his pillow, anchoring us both to the quiet we'd found the night before. Our legs were tangled, his thigh heavy over mine, his chest rising against my back like a second heartbeat I'd somehow memorized in the dark. Outside, birds stirred the silence with song, tentative and spare, as if they too were waiting to see if the day was real. I closed my eyes again, let myself feel it all, the scratch of stubble against my neck, the lingering heat between my thighs, the ache in muscles that had forgotten what it meant to be wanted without urgency. I felt full, not just of him, of us, of something that stretched deeper than the skin we'd explored. His fingers moved, slow and unhurried, tracing a line across my hip like he was writing something only I would ever read. I turned toward him, and he opened his eyes without surprise, like he'd known I'd be there, watching. His gaze was soft, but not sleepy. Awake in that way a man looks at something he didn't believe he'd ever have. Hi, I whispered. His lips curved, barely. Hi. We stared for a moment, no rush, no need to fill the space. His thumb brushed the line of my jaw. How do you feel? I thought about it. Really thought. Like I've just started living inside my own skin. His throat moved as he swallowed. That's the best thing I've ever heard. I let my hand slide down his chest, across the flat plane of his stomach, stopping just above where he pulsed. Already warm, already wanting. You didn't leave, I said, quieter now. Even when I told you I might run again. You didn't have to, he murmured. Your body already chose to stay. He kissed me then, slow and deep, not like a man waking up, but like a man finding his way back home. I climbed over him, straddling his hips, the blanket falling away, the air cool against my skin, his hands hot against my thighs. I bent to kiss his throat, his collarbone, the line of muscle between his ribs. He let me explore, let me write my apology and my desire in the form of my mouth pressed to every inch of him. His hands gripped my waist, firm and reverent, anchoring me as I moved. We didn't speak, we just breathed, and the sound of that breath, mingled and heavy, became the only rhythm that mattered. He sat up, holding me close, our foreheads touching, my legs wrapped around him, his lips brushing the corner of my mouth as if to ask, "Are you still here?" and my body answering with the way I trembled in his arms. We moved slowly at first, the world narrowing to the heat between us, the slickness, the tension, the surrender. He whispered my name like a prayer, like a secret, like he needed it to stay tethered to this reality. And when I came, it wasn't a rush. It was a quiet collapse, a falling inward, my face buried in his neck, his hands holding me together as I came apart. He followed with a low sound, something guttural and broken and real, his mouth on my shoulder, his arms tightening like he needed to remember the shape of me from the inside out. After, we stayed there, tangled in each other, the blanket pooled at our feet, the light growing bolder across the walls. He held me with his hand splayed over my lower back, his thumb tracing small, idle circles, the kind that said, "I'm not done needing you yet, even if we don't move again for hours. I could live here," I said, not to him, not even to myself, but to the room, to the feeling. He tilted his head, studying me. "Then stay." I looked at him, really looked. "It's not that easy. I'm not asking for easy. I'm just asking for honest." My breath caught. "I don't know how to be that. Not yet." "Then learn here, with me." I nodded, eyes burning. "Okay." He kissed my temple, pulled the blanket over our shoulders, wrapped me tighter than I'd ever been held. And in the quiet that followed, I finally let the tears come. Not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't. Because for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to earn this. I just had to let it be. I just had to stay. The days blurred gently, not from monotony, but from a softness I hadn't known life could hold. Morning drifted into afternoon, into evening, into night, without the urgency I'd grown used to carrying. We didn't need clocks. The rhythm of our bodies, waking, touching, cooking, laughing, falling silent, became its own kind of time. He made coffee before I opened my eyes, every morning. The smell would thread through the room, tugging me gently from sleep, and I'd find him leaning against the kitchen counter, barefoot, shirtless, reading something half-forgotten. He'd look up when I entered, and without a word, he'd pour. I'd sit on the stool across from him, legs tucked beneath me, his oversized sweatshirt grazing my thighs, and sip while he watched me like he was still learning the shape of my breathing. We didn't rush breakfast. We didn't rush anything. There was fruit and toast, and sometimes eggs, and always the quiet comfort of knowing no one else knew where we were. No one else could touch this. We read. We built fires. He showed me how the cabin had come together over time, which walls he'd raised first, where the wood had come from, how his hands had turned silence into shelter. I touched everything. The doorframe smoothed by years of habit. The shelves lined with books he'd reread when the world got too loud. The beams above the bed, where he had once lain alone, wondering if wanting me was something he was allowed to keep. And at night, when the dark pulled close around us and the wind kissed the windows, we made love like a ritual. No two nights the same. Sometimes slow, sometimes searching, sometimes quiet as breath, sometimes laced with need so sharp it made my hands claw at his shoulders, my lips beg without words, but always, always with reverence. He held me like he couldn't believe I was real, even as he moved inside me, even as I whispered his name in the dark, over and over, like I was trying to tattoo it to my tongue. And after, when our limbs trembled and our skin shone with sweat and surrender, he'd gather me into his arms and hold me until sleep took us both. I learned his body like a second language, where he tensed, where he softened, where he liked to be kissed, where his breath caught when my fingers found the edges of his hunger. He never asked me for anything I didn't offer first, and somehow that made me want to give him everything. One morning, I woke to find him gone from the bed, but not from the room. He was seated by the window, sketchbook in his lap, pencil moving with a quiet purpose. The light touched the edge of his jaw, the slope of his shoulder, the line of his bare back like a painting. He didn't notice me watching at first, and I didn't interrupt. I just stared at him, heart aching with a sweetness that almost hurt. When he finally looked up, his mouth curved, soft and knowing. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "Had too much of you in my blood." I walked to him, slid behind him in the chair, wrapped my arms around his chest, pressed my face into the crook of his neck. "What are you drawing?" He turned the page just enough for me to see. It was me, sleeping, mouth parted, hair tangled across the pillow, one shoulder bare. I traced the lines with my eyes, the way he'd captured the softness of my expression, the weight of my peace. "You see me," I whispered. He turned his head, pressed a kiss to my temple. "I always did." We spent the afternoon on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the rain come down like silk threads from the sky. It wasn't cold, just quiet, just endless. He read aloud to me from one of his books, voice low and unhurried, and I lay with my head in his lap, letting the cadence of his words lull me into that space between waking and dreaming. I didn't ask what came next. I didn't need to. We were inside the moment so fully, so deeply that the future didn't feel like something we had to chase. It would come, and we would be ready. That night, he made me dinner, real food, with herbs he crushed with his hands, with meat seared in a cast-iron pan, with vegetables roasted in the oven while music played low from the corner speaker. We ate by candlelight, not because we needed the romance, but because the soft glow let us see each other more clearly. He told me about his father, about the silence between them that had never been bridged, about the way he swore never to become a man who couldn't speak. I told him about my mother, about her perfect smiles and sharper expectations, about how my voice had been trained into whispers until I forgot how to speak with desire. We sat long after the plates were cleared, my legs curled beneath me, his foot resting against mine beneath the table. We didn't kiss then. We just looked, like people who understood what it meant to be seen without flinching. When we made love that night, it was different again, slower, deeper. Like we weren't just touching bodies, but memories, wounds, promises not yet spoken aloud. He moved like he was inside a dream. I let go like I had nothing left to hide. And when I came, I cried, not with sadness, but with relief, with the breaking of something that had caged me for too long. He held me through it, murmuring things I didn't catch, pressing kisses to my forehead, my jaw, the tips of my fingers until the trembling stopped. I fell asleep with my head on his chest, his hand in my hair, the rhythm of his heartbeat telling me that home wasn't a place. It was a man, a moment, a quiet between storms, and I had found it, at last. It happened just after noon, when the sun was high and spilling through the windows like gold dust on wood, when the scent of fresh herbs clung to the kitchen, and the last notes of laughter still echoed from a morning that felt too soft to be real. We had spent the early hours wrapped in each other, skin to skin, breath threaded with quiet confessions, and now he was slicing apples at the counter, bare-chested, humming something low under his breath, the knife moving with the slow precision of a man who had nothing to hurry toward. I was sitting on the windowsill, knees pulled to my chest, watching him with the kind of attention that made every part of me ache in the most delicious way. And then the phone rang. The old one, the landline, the one he rarely used. We both looked at it. The sound cut through the peace like something sharp, like a name you haven't heard in years but still know how to fear. He wiped his hands and answered. "Hail," he said, and I heard it. How his voice dropped half an octave, how his shoulders pulled back like armor sliding into place. I stood slowly, heart thudding. His eyes flicked to mine, held. "She's safe," he said after a pause, and my stomach dropped. I knew. I didn't need to hear the other voice to know whose it was. My brother, the one whose shadow I had lived under, the one who had watched me break and never known how to hold the pieces. "She's here," Victor said, calm but impenetrable. "No, you don't need to come." A silence stretched, long and taut, and then he nodded once. "She'll call you." And then he hung up, just like that, like he'd absorbed all the fury, all the disbelief, and let it dissolve inside the quiet furnace of his restraint. He set the phone down and looked at me. I didn't move. "Alex?" I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. "He found the number. Called here looking for you." My throat tightened, fingers curling around the fabric of his t-shirt I'd borrowed hours before. "What did he say?" "He's angry, confused, worried maybe. It's hard to tell with him, but he didn't ask if you were okay. He asked what you were doing here." I closed my eyes. The old script returned, unspoken but familiar. "Elena, be smart. Elena, don't ruin this for the family. Elena, do what's expected." I should have told him, I whispered. "Eventually, but you don't owe anyone your pain," Victor said, crossing the room slowly, his voice low, even. "Not him, not your parents, not anyone who never bothered to see you before you bled." I looked up, and his hands were already reaching for mine, grounding me. "You can call him, or you can wait, or you can never speak to him again. Whatever you choose, I'll back you. But not because you're mine, because you're yours." That undid me. My throat burned. Tears didn't fall, but they rose, thick and unshed, a pressure behind my eyes that blurred everything but the outline of him. I stepped into his arms, pressed my face into his chest, and he held me like he'd always known I'd come apart the moment the past reached for me. "What if he hates me?" I murmured against his skin. "What if I've broken something that doesn't mend?" "Then you'll let it stay broken," he said, his fingers stroking slow circles down my spine. "You'll build something better, somewhere quieter, somewhere you don't have to shrink to fit." I nodded, the movement small, shaky. "Will he come?" "If he does," Victor said, "he'll have to get through me first." I laughed, raw and sudden, and he smiled against my temple. "I'm serious," he added, softer now. "This place, this peace, it's not just yours anymore. It's ours, and I won't let anyone take it." We stayed like that, standing in the kitchen while the sun moved across the floor and the air between us pulsed with history, with loyalty, with something that felt deeper than any promise. Later, I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, heart thudding like it didn't know which direction to run. I dialed. The line rang once, twice. "Elena?" His voice was clipped, familiar, laced with tension. "Hi," I said. One word. One release. "Jesus, where the hell are you? Do you even understand what you've done?" I didn't respond. Not right away. He kept going. The wedding, the guests, the deal. Mom's been crying nonstop. Dad, he's talking about fixing it like it's a business negotiation. "And you just disappear?" "I didn't disappear," I said, my voice steadying. "I left. To be with him?" I paused. "Yes," silence. Then, low and bitter. "You've lost your mind." "No," I said. "I've finally found it." He exhaled hard, like he wanted to throw something. "You don't understand what you've done. You've embarrassed all of us. You've destroyed something that was meant to protect you." "I wasn't protected, Alex. I was imprisoned. So now you think Victor Hale is your savior?" "He didn't save me," I said, voice quiet. "He opened the door. I chose to walk through it. Another silence, this one longer. You sound different, he said finally. Good, I swallowed. Because I am. We didn't say goodbye. I hung up, set the phone on the nightstand, and when I turned, Victor was there, leaning in the doorway, eyes soft but unreadable. He knows, I said. He's angry. Are you okay? Not yet, I whispered. But closer. He came to me, knelt between my legs, took my hands again. I've got you, he said. Whatever comes, whatever breaks, I've got you. And as he leaned in, pressed his lips to the inside of my wrist, I felt it again. That anchoring. That safety that didn't demand, didn't bind, only stayed, only held, only loved. Quietly, completely. As if he'd known all along I would need it most when the noise came back. And that when it did, he'd still be here. Unmoving, unshaken, mine. The night came slower than usual, the sky reluctant to darken, as if even the stars knew we were standing on the edge of something that couldn't be undone. We didn't talk much after the call. Not because there was anger, not even silence, just a fullness between us, the kind that holds space like a breath too long inside the chest. I could feel the shift, not in him, but in me. The trembling edge of decision, the weight of what it meant to choose something not just once, but over and over, even when the world you left behind kept pulling. He made dinner anyway, quietly, like always. His movements in the kitchen were a kind of prayer. I sat at the counter, knees pulled up, watching him light the stove, slice the vegetables, pour the wine. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask if I wanted to stay. He just made a place for me, as if that alone could be the answer. And maybe it was. After we ate, we walked the edge of the clearing behind the cabin, the air crisp, the scent of pine thick in the wind. My hand found his, fingers lacing without effort. His thumb traced the back of mine in small, slow circles. You're quiet, he said. I nodded. Everything feels loud inside. Do you want to go back? The question wasn't sharp. It didn't cut. It landed like a soft stone even, steady. I turned toward him. The moon was low, full, bathing his features in silver. He looked both unreal and entirely mine. No, I said, but not because it's easy here, because it's honest. He exhaled slowly, the sound brushing my skin. Then don't go back. Don't second-guess this. Not us. I stopped walking. He did too. We stood beneath the branches, surrounded by quiet, by wind, by the sacred hush of a place that asked nothing but presence. If I stay, I said, it can't be halfway. He moved closer, so close I could feel the heat of him without touch. Then stay all the way. I looked up. What does that mean to you? He didn't flinch, didn't blink. It means you sleep in my bed, not because it's safe, but because it's yours. It means you wake up next to me, not as a guest, but as someone who's claimed the space. It means when you cry, I don't have to guess why. When you laugh, I already know the shape of it. And when you look at me, it's not with fear. It's with belonging. My breath caught. He stepped even closer, hands brushing my waist, resting there like the answer had already arrived. It means you're not running anymore. Not from him, not from them, not from the girl you used to be. It means you're choosing this. Me, us, every goddamn day, even when it's hard. My chest ached, my ribs strained around the size of the truth trying to break free. What if I'm not ready to be all that? I whispered. What if I don't know how? Then we learn it together, he said, and there was no hesitation. You and me, every step, every fracture, every scar. No masks, no performance, just this. He touched my cheek then, gently, the pad of his thumb brushing beneath my eye like he was memorizing what I looked like when I didn't hide. You've already chosen, he said. You just haven't admitted it to yourself yet. I nodded, barely. I'm scared. Me too, he breathed. But not of you. Never of you. I leaned in, my hands finding the front of his sweater, my forehead pressing to his chest. Then tell me to stay, I whispered. Tell me, and I will. He pulled back just enough to tilt my face to his. No, he said. I won't tell you. I want you to choose it, out loud, in your own voice, so when everything else tries to tear you back, you remember the moment you gave yourself permission to belong. My throat closed. My hands trembled. And then I said it. I want to stay, not for tonight, not just until it hurts again, but for whatever comes next. For the mornings, for the fights, for the days that don't feel like magic. I want all of it. I want all of you. His breath left him in a rush, his hands tightening around my waist, his mouth crashing into mine with the kind of need that didn't ask for forgiveness. I kissed him back like I had something to prove, like the words I'd spoken were too soft to hold unless I stitched them into his skin. He backed me up against the nearest tree, the bark cold through my shirt, the night air burning where his hand slid beneath fabric. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The way he touched me, the way I opened for him, the way our bodies met in that sacred collision of fire and ache, it was all declaration, all vow. When we finished, breathless and clinging, skin damp and flushed, he rested his forehead to mine and said, "Now you've said it. Now you're here." I nodded, my eyes full of stars. I'm here. And we stood there, still caught in each other, while the forest held our secret, and the moon watched like a witness, silent and eternal and full of light. The morning after felt different, not because anything had changed between us, but because something had settled inside me, low and quiet and steady, like a root finally taking hold in soil it could trust. He woke before I did, his body already gone from the warmth of the bed, but the scent of him still lingered on the pillow, on my skin, in the space between sleep and breath. I stretched beneath the blankets, letting the memory of his hands slide over my skin like a second waking, slow and sweet, and so full of yesterday it made my chest ache. I got up wrapped in nothing but his sweater, the sleeves too long, the hem brushing my thighs, the collar loose enough to feel his absence on my collarbone. The floor was cold beneath my feet, the fire from the night before long gone, replaced by the hush of morning and the soft promise of heat rising from the stove. I found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, coffee already brewing, a pan hissing gently behind him as he stirred something without looking. His eyes lifted when I entered. They lingered. And there, in that unguarded moment, something passed between us. Not heat, not hunger, just a knowing, a softness that didn't demand anything, didn't rush forward, only reached and stayed. I crossed the room without speaking and wrapped my arms around his waist from behind, pressed my face into the line between his shoulder blades, and let my body melt into the certainty of his. He stilled for a breath, then covered my hands with his own. "You always this affectionate in the morning?" he asked, voice rough from sleep. "Only when I'm not trying to run," I whispered. He turned in my arms, tilted my chin up, kissed me once like punctuation, final, full. "Good," he said, brushing his lips against my temple, "because I'm not chasing anymore. Not even you." I smiled against his chest, letting the sound of the kitchen fill the space between us. After breakfast, we walked the property, quiet, fingers laced, our steps sinking into soft moss and damp earth. The trees were beginning to change, hints of red and gold pressing at the edges of green, like the forest was learning how to let go. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. I could feel the shift again, less dramatic this time, but present. A slow awareness that this peace, this man, this place, was not a pause. It was the beginning of a new page. But beginnings, I was learning, often came with their own quiet tremors. That afternoon, I found him on the porch, sitting on the edge of the railing, shirt half buttoned, gaze somewhere past the trees. His jaw was tight, his fingers restless. I knew that stillness. I'd lived it. I walked toward him slowly, the boards creaking beneath me, and when I reached him, I didn't ask. I just stood there, close enough for him to speak if he wanted to. He didn't. Not at first. Then finally, low and raw, he said, "You scare me." The words hit like a stone dropped gently in water. I blinked. Why? He looked up at me, and I saw it. The tension in his shoulders, the storm behind his calm. Because I feel too much. And I don't know what happens to a man like me when too much gets taken away. I sat beside him, close enough for our knees to touch, but far enough to let him keep his space. "You think I'll leave?" "I think you might," he said, not with anger, but with truth. "Not because you want to, but because you've been taught that choosing yourself means walking away." I stared at my hands, the way they trembled, the way his words fit too perfectly into the fear I hadn't voiced. "I don't want to leave," I said quietly, "but I don't know how to stay without feeling like I'm giving something up." He nodded, eyes on the horizon. "That's the part no one tells you, that staying isn't always soft. Sometimes it scrapes. Sometimes it asks more of you than leaving ever did." I leaned into him then, rested my head on his shoulder, let the weight of us tilt, then let it scrape, I whispered. "If it means I'm still here." He turned and kissed the top of my head, held me there. "I'll be patient," he said, "but I won't lie. I want you fully, not in pieces, not when it's safe. And if I can't give you that yet," he sighed, deep and long, "then I'll wait, but not forever. Because even love needs to be chosen, Elena, not just felt." That night we didn't make love. We didn't need to. He held me in bed, our limbs a quiet question, our silence a kind of intimacy that pulsed deeper than pleasure. We breathed together, slept tangled. And when I woke before dawn, watching his chest rise and fall beside me, I knew I was already more his than I'd ever meant to be. And still, some part of me was holding, still gripping something unnamed. But for the first time, I wasn't ashamed of that, because I knew now that love wasn't just the falling, it was the staying, even when the staying scared you more than the leap ever did. The morning came in shades of gray, clouds stretching low across the sky like a held breath that refused to break. The rain hadn't started yet, but it was close, humming in the air, thick on the windows, making the world outside feel softer, slower, as if time itself had sunk into stillness. I sat on the edge of the bed, my knees drawn to my chest, his sweater loose around my body, sleeves hanging past my fingers. He was downstairs. I could hear the low rhythm of his movements, the sound of drawers opening, water running, footsteps muffled against the floor. It was the kind of morning that invited memory, that opened the door to all the things you thought you'd buried deep enough not to feel anymore. I rested my chin on my knee and watched the rain begin, small drops at first, then more, until the glass blurred and the trees disappeared behind a curtain of water. It reminded me of the summer I first noticed him. I'd been barefoot on the deck of my parents' lake house, the air thick with heat, my hair damp from swimming. He'd arrived late, trailing behind my brother, quiet and impossibly calm, a stranger who already felt like something more. I'd offered him lemonade. He'd said thank you without looking directly at me. But later, when no one was watching, I felt his gaze land on me like heat, and I remember how my skin had known it was different. Known it was the beginning of something I wouldn't have words for until years later. He didn't touch me that summer. He barely spoke, but I carried the weight of him with me long after. The way he moved, the way he stayed just on the edge of the room, just on the edge of possibility. And I think I fell in love with that edge before I ever knew what falling meant. I stood slowly, walked downstairs barefoot, the floor cold beneath me, grounding me in the now even as the past tugged soft threads through my thoughts. He was in the kitchen again, slicing strawberries with the kind of focus most people reserved for more dangerous things. He looked up when I entered, his eyes tired, warm, full of something unspoken. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. I shook my head. "You?" "Not really." He set the knife down, wiped his hands on a towel, leaned back against the counter like he was bracing for something. "There's something I should have told you," he said. My stomach tightened. I walked to the table, sat down, watched him the way you watch someone right before they say something that might change everything. He didn't move for a moment, just breathed. Then he said, "That last summer, the one before I disappeared, I didn't leave because I had to. I left because I wanted you. And I knew I couldn't have you." The air between us shifted, slow and heavy. I didn't speak. I let him keep going. "You were 17. I was 29. I was your brother's friend. I was trying to build a business, a life. And you—" His voice cracked, just a little. "You were standing on the edge of a dock in that white sundress, and I knew, right then, if I stayed, I would ruin everything." I swallowed hard. My chest ached. "You looked at me," I whispered. "But you never touched me." "Because if I had," he said, stepping forward now, slowly, "I wouldn't have been able to stop." I looked down at the table, at the small scar on my hand I'd had since childhood, at the way my fingers curled into themselves like they were trying to hold something that kept slipping. "I waited," I said. "After you left, I waited longer than I should have." "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry. I've been sorry every day since, but I had to be sure. I had to know that when I came back, I wasn't still seeing you as the girl on the dock. I had to see the woman you'd become, and I had to believe you could choose me without all the noise around you." I stood, slow and steady, walked to where he stood, stopped just close enough to feel his breath. "I did choose you," I said, even before I understood what that meant. He reached for me, his hands brushing my face like I might break under the weight of his confession. "You're not a fantasy to me anymore," he whispered. "You're not the girl I watched from a distance. You're real, messy, brave, and mine, if you still want to be." I closed my eyes, let his words settle over me like rain, like forgiveness. "I'm yours," I said, "but not because of what we almost were, because of what we are now." His arms came around me then, strong and sure, pulling me into the heat of him, into the present, into the home we were building one unspoken truth at a time. And there, with the storm humming outside and his heart steady beneath my cheek, I felt the past loosen its grip, not erased, not forgotten, but held, honored, and finally, set down. It started small, like most things that change your life do. A strange tug in my belly one morning as I stood at the sink brushing my teeth. The taste of mint suddenly too sharp, too cold, like a warning. I ignored it. At first, blamed it on sleep, or nerves, or the way I hadn't really eaten dinner the night before, too full of the quiet between our words, and the way he had kissed my shoulder as I turned off the light. But then it happened again, and again. The nausea, creeping in slow waves, the heaviness behind my eyes, the way my body didn't quite feel like mine, as if something underneath my skin was shifting, preparing. I didn't say anything, not right away, because the thought itself was too loud, too bright, too much to hold without trembling. I went for a walk alone, through the woods behind the cabin, the path narrow and damp with morning, pine needles soft beneath my steps. The silence helped. It always did. The air wrapped around me like memory, like breath, and I let the possibilities run through me in quiet, careful loops. It couldn't be. And yet, every part of me whispered otherwise. When I came back, he was on the porch, mug in hand, sweater pulled over his wrists, his eyes lifting the moment he saw me like he'd been waiting for that exact glimpse of me between trees. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded too fast. He noticed. "Of course he did. You're pale. I'm tired. You didn't sleep." I hesitated. "Not well." He watched me for a beat longer, then reached for my hand, pulling me gently down beside him. I leaned into his shoulder, let the warmth of him soothe the chill I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. We didn't talk much that day. I watched him from across the room as he worked through emails, glasses perched low on his nose, fingers moving across the keyboard like music. I sat curled on the sofa, a blanket around my shoulders, and stared out the window. The questions louder now, more persistent. That night, I dreamed of water, of standing ankle-deep in a lake while something pulsed beneath the surface, something mine and not mine all at once. I woke with a start, hand pressed to my stomach, breath shallow, heart racing like it already knew. The next morning I drove into town alone, told him I needed air. He offered to come. I said no. He kissed me anyway. I found a pharmacy with creaky floors and a bell that rang too loud over the door. I paid in cash. Drove back slowly, the box burning in the passenger seat like a secret I wasn't ready to keep, but couldn't set down. I waited until the afternoon, until the light changed, until the house was still, until he had gone out to chop wood at the edge of the clearing. Then I locked the bathroom door and sat on the edge of the tub, staring at the plastic stick like it might blink first. 5 minutes passed, then 2 more. I didn't breathe. I didn't pray. I just waited. And when the second line bloomed, faint but undeniable, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply sat there, the silence thick around me, and felt the world shift beneath my feet. A child. His. Ours. A beginning inside a beginning. And I didn't know whether to laugh or break. I left the test on the bathroom counter and walked outside barefoot, the cold earth grounding me, steadying me as I crossed the yard to where he stood, sleeves rolled, axe in hand, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat. He looked up, brow furrowed, eyes scanning my face. "What is it?" I couldn't speak yet, not with my throat so full. I just kept walking until I was standing in front of him, until he dropped the axe and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Elena," he said, voice low, careful, already bracing. I placed his hand on my stomach, just placed it there, and waited. His eyes searched mine, confusion giving way to realization, slow and wide and breathtaking. "You're sure?" he whispered. I nodded. I took the test twice, his palm pressed gently against me, fingers trembling. "Are you scared?" I finished for him. "Yes, terrified." He pulled me into his arms so suddenly, so tightly, that it knocked the air from my lungs. "But not alone," he said. "Not for a second." I buried my face in his chest and let the weight of it settle. The awe, the fear, the disbelief, the hope. And when he pulled back to look at me, his hands cradling my face, his eyes shining in that way only truth can make a man shine, he said, "Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I'm in. I'm so in, Elena. You have no idea." I laughed through a sob, touched my forehead to his. "It's not how I imagined telling you. It's better," he said, kissing me once, twice, like it was the first time again, "because it's real, and it's us. And I wouldn't trade this moment for anything else in the world." We stood there until the wind turned colder, until the light began to shift, until our shadows stretched long across the clearing and the sky blushed with dusk. And I knew then, as his hand stayed on my belly and my heart beat beneath his touch, that love had just found a new shape inside me, one that kicked, one that grew, one that would never let me run again. The days that followed were quieter, but not in the way silence used to mean loneliness. This silence was full, humming beneath the surface of every breath, every glance, every brush of fingers against skin, as we moved through a space that was no longer just a refuge, but something growing roots beneath our feet. He had taken to touching my stomach more often, gently, reverently, like it was a secret only we understood. Sometimes he would rest his hand there without saying anything at all, and I'd feel the truth of it in my bones, that something new was anchoring us now, pulling our gravity closer, softening the sharp edges of who we'd been into who we were becoming. I felt it too, in the way my body responded, tender in places it hadn't been before, in the way my hunger changed, in the way sleep came in waves and fatigue wrapped around my limbs like a weighted blanket I hadn't asked for. But I didn't tell him everything, not the moments when fear still licked at the edges of my thoughts, not the mornings when I woke too early, heart racing, stomach turning, and lay still for long stretches trying to remember who I was before this shift began. I wanted to be strong for him, for us, for the small pulse of life growing inside me, so I smiled when I could. I held his hand. I let him carry the heavier bags, and I told myself it was okay not to know how to carry everything all at once. But one morning, the dizziness came fast. A rush of heat, a burst of white behind my eyes. I was standing by the sink, reaching for a glass of water, and then suddenly I wasn't standing at all. The floor met me too quickly. The glass shattered, water spilling like breath across the tile, and the world spun. When I opened my eyes, he was there, kneeling beside me, panic etched into every line of his face. "Elena," he said, voice breaking, hands sliding beneath my shoulders, lifting me with a gentleness that made my throat close. "Breathe, baby. Please, just breathe." I tried. I did. But my chest felt tight, like it had forgotten how to open. His arms cradled me, pressing me close, and I felt the tremble in his fingers as they stroked my hair, as they searched my body for something broken. "It's okay," I managed to whisper, though my lips barely moved. "I'm okay." "You're not," he said, holding me tighter. "You fainted. You hit the floor. You scared the hell out of me." I let my head fall against his chest, heart pounding now, not from fear but from the way he held me, like he might not survive letting go. "It was just a moment," I said. "I didn't eat enough. I didn't sleep well. He pulled back, eyes searching mine, voice low and rough. "Don't minimize this. Not to me. Not to yourself." I swallowed hard. "I didn't want to worry you." "Worry me," he said, his hands cradling my face now, his thumbs brushing away the wetness I hadn't realized had fallen. "Let that be the thing you give me. I want to worry. I want to carry it with you. Don't protect me from the parts that scare you." I closed my eyes, let his forehead rest against mine. The floor was cold, his body was warm, and for the first time in hours, I felt safe again. He helped me up slowly, guiding me to the couch, tucking the blanket around my legs, placing a cool cloth against the back of my neck like he'd done it 1,000 times before. He made tea with trembling hands, sat beside me with eyes that didn't leave mine for a second too long. "We should see someone," he said gently. "I want to know you're okay, that the baby's okay." I nodded. "I know. I want that too." "Tomorrow," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "We'll drive into town, find someone good. You don't have to do this alone." "I never did," I whispered, even when I thought I was. He leaned in then, pressed a kiss to my forehead, then another to my temple, his lips lingering like they were promising something stronger than words. We sat like that for a long time, the afternoon slipping into dusk, the wind picking up outside, and I could feel the storm coming, but it didn't scare me this time. Not with his arms around me, not with his voice in my ear telling me over and over again that I wasn't too much, that needing him didn't make me weaker, that asking to be held didn't make me a burden. That night, he undressed me like I was something sacred, not for sex, not for heat, just to feel the softness of skin against skin, to wrap himself around me and hold me until sleep came like mercy. And in the stillness of those hours, I knew something had shifted again, not because I had broken, but because I had let myself be seen in the break, and he hadn't turned away. He'd only pulled me closer. The town felt distant, even though it wasn't far. We drove in silence, not the heavy kind, but the kind that holds something gentle between it, something waiting. The rain from the night before had left the road slick, the sky pale with thin clouds, the edges of the world washed in muted grays and soft browns. I kept my hand in his, resting there, open, still. Every few minutes he'd glance at me, thumb brushing along the top of my fingers like punctuation, like checking for signs I hadn't spoken yet. I wasn't afraid, not anymore. I was something else entirely, quietly bracing, softly full. The clinic was small, tucked between a bookstore and a coffee shop with handwritten chalkboard menus and rain-speckled windows. Inside, everything smelled like lemon and clean linen. The waiting room chairs were warm to the touch. I filled out the forms slowly, fingers tight on the pen, my name written in a way that looked unfamiliar under the heading, Emergency Contact. He sat close but didn't crowd, hand on my back, palm flat, grounding me without pulling. When they called my name, he stood too. I looked at him. He didn't speak. He didn't ask. He just moved with me. The nurse smiled, the kind of smile you want to believe in, the kind that's seen all versions of this moment. She asked questions I barely heard, took my blood pressure, my weight, 100 measurements that made me feel like numbers instead of something growing. He held my sweater while they did the scan, sat in the corner with his elbows on his knees, his jaw tight, his eyes following every movement like he was memorizing the sequence of care. And then the sound came, like a whisper, then a flutter, then a drum, that heartbeat. Fast, strong, steady. I turned toward the screen and saw it, a shape, a shadow, a flicker of becoming. His hand found mine, and when I looked back at him, his eyes were glassed with something that split me open without a sound. We didn't speak until we were outside again, walking slowly down the street toward the car. The wind lifted the hem of my coat. He slid his arm around my shoulders. I leaned into him, heart swollen, chest tight. "It's real," I whispered. "I know," he said. I heard it. We stopped near the edge of a park. Children ran across wet grass. A mother laughed too loud. Someone tossed breadcrumbs to a cluster of birds that didn't know the difference between gift and survival. He turned to me then, both hands framing my face, the city sounds falling away until there was only the softness of his voice. "I want this," he said. "Not because I'm ready, not because I know how, but because it's you, because it's us, and I will spend the rest of my life figuring it out if you'll let me." My breath caught. "I don't know how to be a mother." "Good," he said, brushing a tear from the corner of my eye. "Then we'll learn by listening, not to books, not to rules, but to what this life teaches us." I nodded slowly, everything inside me unwinding. "Okay." His lips brushed my forehead, then my mouth, the kiss soft, slow, full of everything we couldn't say on paper. We drove back with one hand on my belly and the other laced with his. The sun had started to burn through the clouds by the time we reached the cabin. The world touched in gold again, like the earth knew what we were carrying now. Inside, he made soup. I sat at the counter, watching him chop and stir and taste, his body moving with the kind of ease that made me ache. I didn't need perfection. I only needed this, his presence, his care, the quiet way he made room for my breath in every hour. That night, I lay curled against him in bed, his hand resting over the small swell of my stomach, the thrum of his heartbeat slow and sure beneath my cheek. "What if I'm still afraid?" I asked, voice thick with the edge of sleep. "Then we'll hold the fear together," he said, "until it learns we're not running from it." I didn't respond. I just let the weight of his words settle into the space between us like a blanket, like a vow, like a map that would always lead me home. And as I drifted into sleep, the baby fluttered once, soft and new, a tiny nudge against the inside of my body, and I smiled in the dark, knowing I wasn't alone anymore. Not now, not ever again. The days began to fold into one another like soft linen, smoothed and layered with care. Everything slowed, not in boredom, not in stagnation, but in reverence. There was something sacred in the way he moved through the house now, a quiet attentiveness that made every moment feel chosen. He brought me tea in the mornings before I even reached for the blanket, placed a hand on my stomach like he was greeting both of us, not saying anything, just letting his touch remind me I wasn't carrying this life alone. We spoke less about the outside world, the news, the noise, even the phone, once a tether, had been left in drawers, silenced. We lived in the hush between appointments, between symptoms, between fluttering movements beneath my skin that stopped me mid-sentence, mid-thought, mid-breath. I began writing again, not for anyone else, not to be read or praised, just to remember. The sound of my own words, the shape of them in my hand. He watched me from across the room sometimes, his glasses low on his nose, one hand curled around a mug, the other sketching lines I never saw until hours later. Drawings of me, my face, my spine, the curve of my body as it changed. He never asked permission. He never showed me right away. He let the images speak in their own time. In the afternoons, we worked on the nursery, the room that used to be filled with tools and boxes, forgotten sweaters, a chair too broken to fix. We cleared it slowly, piece by piece, like memory was being swept from corners we hadn't known were cluttered. He measured the walls. I chose colors. Nothing bright, nothing loud, just tones of softness, ivory, dusty blue, the faintest hint of rose in the curtains that caught the light like breath. He built the crib himself. Didn't tell me when he started. I found him in the garage, sleeves rolled, sawdust in his hair, eyes alight with the kind of purpose that made my chest ache. I stood in the doorway and watched him run his hands over the frame, his fingers tracing each line with a precision I recognized not from furniture, but from the way he touched me. "You okay?" he asked, not looking up. "Better than okay," I said. "I'm watching the man I love build a home for a life we made without planning it." He paused, the chisel in his hand stilling. Then he looked at me, slow and full and quiet. "I didn't plan you either," he said, "but you're the only thing I've never questioned." I walked to him then, slid my arms around his waist from behind, pressed my face into his back and let myself breathe in the smell of cedar and sweat and something deeper, safety, belonging. He turned in my arms, kissed me slow, then placed his hands on my stomach and knelt. "Hey," he whispered, "we're almost ready for you." I ran my fingers through his hair, felt the way he rested his forehead against the curve of me, like he was listening for something only he could hear. That night, we lay on the rug in the middle of the nursery, staring at the ceiling, our fingers intertwined, our shoulders touching. The window was cracked open, letting in the smell of early autumn, the hush of falling leaves. "I'm afraid," I said finally. "Me too," he replied. "Not of the baby, of not being enough, of getting it wrong." He turned to me, brushed my hair back from my forehead. "We will get it wrong, 100 times, but we'll also get it right. Not because we're perfect, but because we'll try." "And when I forget who I am?" I asked. "When I'm tired and hollow and full of doubt? Then I'll remind you," he said, "with my hands, with my voice, with every look that tells you I still see you, even when you don't." My throat closed, my chest tightening around the shape of a love I hadn't realized I'd needed until it was wrapped around me so tightly I couldn't fall through it. "I don't deserve this," I whispered. "You do," he said. "Not because you've done everything right, but because you finally stopped pretending you had to." We fell asleep on the rug, curled into each other. No plans, no declarations, just the slow rhythm of two hearts learning how to beat in tandem. In the middle of the night, I woke to the smallest movement, a flutter against the inside of my belly, soft and unmistakable. I pressed his hand there, and his eyes opened instantly, finding mine in the dark. "Did you feel that?" I asked. He nodded. "I felt everything." We didn't go back to sleep. We lay there, whispering stories into the dark, imagining names and tiny hands, and what it might feel like to hear a first laugh echo through the walls of this house we'd built out of nothing but risk and tenderness. And when the sky turned pink again, and the light returned through the windows like a promise, I knew there would be fear ahead, and pain, and mess. But I also knew there would be mornings like this, where the only thing that mattered was that we had arrived here, together, with our hands full of love and our hearts wide open to whatever came next. The first snowfall came quietly, without warning, soft as breath against the windowpane. I woke to the hush of it. The light in the room filtered white and clean, the kind of stillness that makes you want to whisper even when you're alone. He was already up, of course, because he always rose before me now, making coffee in that gentle, deliberate way, the way that filled the house with warmth before the day even began. I stayed in bed for a while, one hand curved instinctively around the growing swell of my belly, the other stretched into the space where he had been. It wasn't cold. His absence never was. He left traces, his warmth, his scent, the way the blanket still held the shape of his body. When I finally came downstairs, he was standing by the window, coffee in hand, eyes on the snow-covered clearing. He turned when he heard me, his smile slow and soft, like it always was when he looked at me first thing. "Morning," he said, voice still gravelly from sleep. I went to him, curled into the front of his body, and let his free arm wrap around me. We stood like that, watching the snow fall, our breaths sinking. "You always wanted a winter baby," he said. "I never said that." "You didn't have to." His hand slid protectively over my stomach. "You like the quiet, the slow, the way everything gets stripped down to what matters." I smiled, resting my head against his chest. "Maybe I just like the way snow makes the world feel like a beginning." He kissed the top of my head. "Then let's begin something." I pulled back, looked up at him. "What do you mean?" He set the coffee cup down, took my hands in his, suddenly serious, suddenly still. "Marry me." I blinked. "Victor, not for the paperwork, not for the name, Not because it makes anything more real than it already is. His voice dropped into that low, reverent register that always unraveled me. But because I want to stand in front of you with nothing between us. No past, no fear, just your hand in mine. Just a yes. Just you. My throat tightened. I felt the answer bloom inside me like breath, like light, like something I'd never had to think about because I'd known it from the moment I stepped into his car and didn't ask where we were going. Yes, I whispered, and then louder, firmer, fuller. Yes. His mouth found mine before the word had even finished leaving it, and everything inside me lit up. The kiss wasn't urgent. It didn't need to be. It was slow, deep, the kind that sinks, the kind that claims without pressure. Tomorrow, he said against my lips. Just us, just quiet, just the promise. And so it was. The next day, the world still blanketed in white, he built a fire in the old hearth at the cabin's edge, the one we hadn't used in months. I wore a simple cream sweater dress and no shoes. He wore a black shirt, sleeves rolled, the top button undone. There were no rings, only the way his hand shook slightly as he took mine, only the way his voice broke when he said, "I will love you in every version you become." I said yes again, through tears, through laughter, through the kind of stillness that only ever comes once in a lifetime. Afterward, he carried me to bed like I was something precious, like something he was afraid he might wake from. We made love with the snow falling outside, the firelight dancing across our skin, every touch slower, deeper, more deliberate. I cried when he whispered my name against my shoulder. He kissed the curve of my belly like a vow. And in that room, in that moment, I stopped counting the things I had lost. I only saw what I had found. A man who never asked me to shrink. A home that asked nothing of me but presence. A future that pulsed beneath my skin, steady and wild. And when we finally slept, limbs tangled, hearts full, the snow kept falling outside, gentle and endless, erasing every path behind us, leaving only the one we were making now, together. The last month felt like standing on the edge of something sacred. Every day closer to the moment, everything would change, and nothing would ever be the same. The air was sharper, crisper, each breath deep with expectation, and my body, heavy and full, carried more than just life now. It carried time, memory. The weight of choices made not out of fear, but out of fierce, quiet love. I moved slower, measured, like the house had become an extension of me, each creaking board beneath my feet echoing a rhythm I didn't have to think about anymore. He was different too, not outwardly. He still made coffee every morning, still wrapped his arms around me while I stood at the window, still whispered things that made me blush even when my body was all curve and ache and tenderness. But there was something deeper in him now, a protectiveness that didn't hover or press, but settled around me like breath. He'd touch my belly with both hands sometimes, eyes wide with something that looked like awe, like reverence, and I could feel it in him, the fear, the anticipation, the way love had reshaped him quietly, like water smoothing stone. We spent our days building softness into the corners of the nursery, folding tiny clothes, hanging shelves, arguing gently over which drawer should hold what, only to collapse into laughter when neither of us could remember why it mattered. There were nights I couldn't sleep, too restless, too full. I'd find him already awake, sketching in the corner, bare-chested, legs folded, completely absorbed in capturing something he could never explain. One night I walked to him, stood behind his shoulder, and saw what he was drawing. A window, cracked open, curtains blowing inward, and in the center, a crib bathed in light. He didn't say anything when he felt me watching. He just reached back, pulled me into his lap, cradled me there until the wind outside settled and the stillness wrapped around us like a blanket. I asked him once what scared him the most. He didn't answer right away. He just traced the inside of my wrist with his thumb, thoughtful, quiet. Then he said, that I won't know how to love you and this child at the same time, that I'll fail you both. I cupped his face in my hands and kissed him like I was answering a question he hadn't meant to ask out loud. You already love us, I said. More than enough, more than I knew I could need. He rested his forehead against mine and whispered, just don't leave, even if I stumble, even if I'm learning slowly. I'm not going anywhere, I breathed. We stumbled together. That's the promise. When the first contraction came, it was early morning, snow dusting the windows, the fire barely embering. It wasn't dramatic, just a shift, a slow, deep tightening that took my breath and gave it back differently. He was asleep beside me, arm draped across my waist, his breathing steady. I didn't wake him. I just lay there, still, counting seconds, counting space, letting the reality fold over me like water. When the second one came, I placed his hand on my stomach, and his eyes opened instantly. "It's time," I whispered. He was already moving, voice soft but sure, hands steady. He'd rehearsed this moment 100 times, quietly, when he thought I wasn't watching. He had packed the bag, checked the route, spoken with the midwife. When I stood, he was there, holding me, dressing me, wrapping my scarf gently around my neck, as if I might break if he moved too fast. The drive was quiet, headlights carving paths through snow-lined roads, the world still asleep. He kept his hand on my knee, his thumb moving in slow circles, like he could calm the rhythm of my body with the warmth of his skin. At the birthing center, everything blurred. Soft voices, gentle lights, the quiet hum of women who knew what it meant to guide someone through the fire of becoming. He never left my side, not for a second. He whispered into my ear when the pain was too loud, held my face when I thought I couldn't do it, and when I finally pushed through the last wave, through the heat, through the break, through the holy tearing of one life into two, our child cried, and I cried, and he cried. He cut the cord with shaking hands and held our daughter like she was made of light. I watched him from the bed, exhausted, trembling, undone, and yet I had never felt more whole. He looked at me, eyes full, mouth open in disbelief, and said, "She looks like you." I smiled, tears falling freely. "No, she looks like us." He brought her to me, laid her gently against my chest, and the three of us breathed together for the first time, skin to skin to skin, hearts beating in new rhythms. And in that moment, there were no ghosts, no regrets, only this small, perfect proof that love, real love, doesn't just stay. It multiplies, it roots, it becomes. The world looked different after she came, not louder or fuller, but more still. As if time itself had softened, stepped back, given us space to become a new kind of quiet. The kind you only find in the smallness of a newborn's breath against your collarbone, in the hush of early dawn when the rest of the house is sleeping, and your body aches from love in a way it never has before. We named her Isla, not because of its meaning, though later we'd read that it spoke of islands, of solitude surrounded by movement, but because when I whispered it for the first time, she turned her face toward my voice and sighed like she knew. Victor held her like he'd been waiting his whole life for this one weight in his arms. He sang to her sometimes when he thought I wasn't listening, old songs his mother used to hum, or just nonsense melodies built from the cadence of her name. His voice changed when he spoke to her, softer, slower, reverent. I would watch them from the rocker, one hand on my chest, the other curled around a warm cup of tea, and feel something inside me loosen, stretch, bloom. We stayed home for weeks, not because we were afraid, but because the world outside suddenly felt unnecessary. Everything that mattered was inside our four walls now, wrapped in muslin blankets and small cries, and the scent of warm skin and breast milk and firewood. There were hard moments, of course, nights when she wouldn't sleep, hours when I couldn't stop crying, though I didn't know why, days when I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, my body still healing, my mind still learning how to hold joy and exhaustion at the same time. But he never flinched, he never pulled away. He sat beside me during every feeding, held me when the weight of it all made me feel hollow, kissed my forehead while I sobbed into his shirt for no reason at all. "You're not broken," he'd say. "You're becoming." And that made all the difference. We found our rhythm slowly, in uneven steps, in naps taken in sunlight, in whispered stories read aloud with her tucked between us, her tiny hands flexing in dreams. He built her a cradle for the living room, a soft curve of pale wood that rocked with a single touch. I filled it with hand-stitched linens, with letters I began writing to her before she was born, folded between the blankets like hidden roots. One morning, I woke to find him asleep on the floor beside the cradle, his hand inside it, fingers curled loosely around her wrist as she slept. It undid me in the quietest way. I curled around them, rested my cheek against his shoulder, and breathed in the truth of it. We were here. We had arrived. Not at the end of something, but at the beginning of a life built entirely from the decision to stay. Sometimes Alex called. Sometimes I answered. His voice sounded different now, less full of fire, more of something like regret. He asked for pictures, for updates. I gave what I could. He never pushed. One night, while Isla slept curled into the crook of my arm, Victor asked me if I missed the girl I used to be. I thought about it for a long time. Then I said, I think she'd be proud of me, for running, for staying, for becoming someone new. He kissed me then, slow and deep, and whispered, "She was always in you. You just stopped hiding her." We made love that night without rush, without the desperation of all those early nights. It was slower, more reverent. His hands lingered, His mouth worshipped. My body, changed and tender, opened for him like it had never done before, like it finally knew what it meant to be loved completely. He cried when he came, quietly, his face buried in my neck. I held him the way he held me those first nights after Isla was born, and I knew then, in every corner of my body, that nothing about us was fragile anymore. We had been tested, we had bled, we had built, and we had become. Later, while he slept beside me, our daughter in the cradle by the bed, the fire casting long shadows on the walls, I took a pen and wrote another letter. This one was for me, for the girl who had run, for the woman who had stayed, for the mother who was learning that love didn't require perfection, only presence. I folded it, tucked it beneath my pillow, and closed my eyes. And in that moment, I understood something simple and full, that love, when it's real, doesn't save you. It invites you to stay, to rise, to begin again, over and over, with your whole heart, with both hands, and with no fear left at all. There are mornings now that stretch so softly they feel like memory long before the sun has fully risen. Mornings where I wake before anyone else, before the sound of Ila's feet padding softly down the hallway, before Victor rolls over to find me already gone from the bed, before the kettle starts to sing. I sit by the window wrapped in his old sweater, the one that still smells faintly of cedar and years gone by, watching the light spill over the field behind our home. The trees are taller now, the earth a little wiser, and the woman in the reflection of the glass, she is no longer running. She is rooted. I didn't know I could be this still, this full, this quiet inside my own skin, and yet, here I am. The house sleeps with the slow exhale of a life lived deeply. There are toys scattered on the floor, a small book open on the stairs, laundry folded but never quite put away, the sound of breathing in every room. It's not perfect, but it is honest. And I have come to understand that honesty is the most beautiful kind of peace. Victor loves me like he did the day I ran, fully, without question, without needing me to be anything but exactly who I am. He touches me like I am still new to him, like time hasn't dulled the wonder, only deepened the knowing. Sometimes we dance in the kitchen, bare feet on cold tile, music low, his hand at the small of my back like it belongs there permanently. Isla watches us with wide eyes, her fingers tangled in a stuffed rabbit, her mouth half-curved in a smile she doesn't yet know mirrors mine. And I think this is what becoming looks like. Not loud, not sudden, but tender and slow. 1,000 tiny moments stitched into something unbreakable. My brother visits often now. There was a season of silence, of course, of guilt and space and the kind of love that needs time to find its way back. But he came. One morning, unannounced, standing on the porch with a bag of groceries and a letter he never made me read. We sat on the steps for hours, Isla curled against my chest, Victor watching from a distance but ready to move if needed. And somewhere in the quiet, forgiveness bloomed. Not all at once, but in pieces, the way most true things do. I still think about the girl I used to be, the one in the lace dress, breath caught in her throat, heart pounding like a warning as she stared down the aisle and realized the life in front of her didn't have room for her own voice. I ache for her sometimes, not because I miss her, but because I finally understand her. She didn't run to be reckless. She ran to survive. She ran to remember who she was before the world told her to shrink. And now, when I look at Isla sleeping, her hair spread like a halo, her breath soft and even, I know that everything I left behind was necessary to give her this. A mother who chose herself first. A love that doesn't demand. A father who stays without being asked. I write letters to her now. Tuck them into a box in the nursery closet. Words she won't read for years, maybe never. But they're there. Stories of how she came to be. How we built a home out of nothing but silence and surrender. How her name was the first word her father spoke the moment he held her. Like it was always there, waiting behind his ribs. We talk about having another sometimes. Late at night, when the fire is low and Isla is dreaming, he'll trace lazy circles on my bare shoulder and say something like, "Imagine too," and I'll smile, tuck myself closer to him and whisper, "Maybe." Not because I'm uncertain, but because this life, this quiet, messy, extraordinary life, is already so much more than I ever thought I was allowed to want. We still return to the cabin every year, the one where everything began, just the three of us. No phones, no clocks, just wind in the trees and our hands around each other like the first time. Victor chops firewood in the early morning light while Isla and I gather pine cones and whisper secrets into the sky. Sometimes I find him watching us, that same look in his eyes, the one that says everything. I love you. I found you. I'm not going anywhere. and neither am I. Because love, I've learned, isn't about being saved. It's about being seen, fully, without armor, without disguise. It's about standing in front of someone and saying, "Here is every broken, beautiful piece of me. Do you still want it?" And hearing yes, every day, even when the yes is quiet. Even when it's spoken through tired hands and silent dinners and the simple act of folding the laundry you forgot you left in the dryer. This is what we chose, not the perfect, but the present, the raw, the real, and I would choose it again, 1,000 times, through every ache, every breath, every beginning, every end, because I didn't just fall in love with a man. I fell into my own life, my own skin, my own voice, and I stayed. That's the part that matters. I stayed. The second honeymoon came years later, not planned with fanfare or marked on calendars, but born from a quiet evening when Isla had finally fallen asleep without asking for one more story, and Victor had looked at me across the table with a softness that made my breath catch. He didn't ask, he didn't suggest. He just reached for my hand, laced our fingers together, and said, "You and me, just us, for a little while." And I knew exactly what he meant. We returned to the coast, to a small house tucked behind dunes and wild grass, where the ocean whispered through open windows and time stretched out like silk. It wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. It was distance, breath, the rare and sacred space to remember not just who we had become together, but who we still were beneath the layers of parenthood and routine and the beautiful weight of a life shared. I brought only one suitcase, mostly empty. He packed my favorite sweater, the soft gray one I always stole from his side of the closet, and a bottle of wine I didn't touch. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to numb a single second of what we were about to become again. On the first night, we didn't go out. We stayed in, ate dinner cross-legged on the floor, the fireplace flickering shadows across our bare feet. I watched the way his eyes followed me as I moved around the room, like they still hadn't tired of the shape of me, even after all these years, even after all the nights with my back turned in sleep and my hair pulled into messy knots. Even after the weight of motherhood had softened my waist and curved my hips in ways no mirror ever quite captured. He looked at me like it was still that first night, and when he touched me, he didn't rush. He didn't press. He simply reached, slid the sweater off my shoulders with a slowness that made my knees tremble, like he wanted to memorize every part of me all over again. I let him, let my body become his again, piece by piece, heartbeat by heartbeat. We didn't speak, not when his hands mapped the stretch of my thighs. Not when his mouth found the place just beneath my ear that made my breath stutter. Not even when I whispered his name into the hollow of his throat, like a secret I'd kept for too long. He made love to me that night like he was relearning every curve, every sigh, every scar. Like he knew my body had been used to build a life, and now he wanted to build something else with it. Something tender, something slow, something just for us. When I came apart beneath him, it wasn't from the rhythm. It was from the reverence, from the way he held my eyes, from the way his voice broke when he whispered, "I still want you like I did that first day." I touched his face as he moved above me, sweat slick between our skin, and I said, "Take me, all of me, again, forever." And he did. We slept tangled, the sheets twisted, the room warm with the kind of silence that follows surrender. In the morning, he brought me coffee in bed, and I sipped it while naked beneath the covers, his fingers lazily drawing lines down my spine as we watched the sun rise through linen curtains. We stayed there for hours, not needing anything more than the weight of each other, the steady rhythm of skin against skin, the quiet luxury of not being needed by anyone but ourselves. He told me he still dreamed of the day I walked into his car, that sometimes, in sleep, he relived the moment my dress dragged behind me in the alley, the way my eyes met his like I was choosing something without even knowing what it meant yet. He said he still couldn't believe I had stayed. I told him I hadn't stayed. I had finally come home, that he had been the place I was running toward all along. We walked the beach later, hand in hand, the wind sharp with salt and sky. I let my hair blow wild, let the cold sting my cheeks, let the waves soak my ankles. He chased me like he used to, like we were still young, still breathless, still waiting to find out what happened next. He caught me in the surf, his hands on my waist, his mouth against mine, laughing into the kiss like it was the first one. And there, soaked to the skin, hearts beating wild beneath sweaters and memory, I fell in love with him again. Not with the man who saved me, but with the man who stayed, the one who never asked me to be small, the one who knew the weight of silence and still held space for my voice. That night, we didn't just make love, we worshipped. Every kiss a vow, every touch a question, and an answer. Every breath a reminder that desire, real desire, doesn't fade. It deepens, grows roots, learns your name in new ways. And when he finally whispered mine into the dark, when his hands gripped me like prayer, I opened to him with everything I had, not just body, but soul. I let him back in, all the way. And when we lay there after, his chest beneath my cheek, his fingers in my hair, the night wrapping around us like a promise, I said, I would choose you again. Every time. Even if I had to run through fire. Even if I had to tear myself in two. I'd still choose this. You, us. And he said, then let's never stop choosing. And we haven't. Not since. Not ever. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for being here and listening all the way through. Your presence means more than words can express. Every little interaction, whether it's a comment, a heart, or a quiet share, truly touches me. It might seem small, but each one helps this channel grow, reach more hearts, and carry love a little further into the world. If you're not yet subscribed, I warmly invite you to join us now, so you don't miss the stories still waiting to be told.